Hello, this is Dr. Alina Hernandez, meeting you again in this parenting project. I appreciate your tuning back in with us, and today we're going to be talking about the laws of guiding children so that we can make differences or state some differences between what is good discipline and maybe not so good discipline. One of the questions we have received from many of you is corporal punishment illegal? That means is spanking against the law. And what the law says in the state of California, I think each state may have a totally different law regarding that. But what the state of California says that is legal is to hit the child with an open hand against the buttocks. That is the legal limit of corporal punishment. That means that anything other than that is not recommended, not allowed, illegal. Of course, many parents, I would say the majority of parents, use some kind of corporal punishment with their children. When they are smaller, there's usually the spanking, which kind of falls within those legal grounds. Anything with some kind of a tool, like a belt or a shoe or a ruler or anything like that, is not allowed. Why is that? Well, if you were not trying to inflict pain on a child, if you were just doing, okay, that's not good, that would probably be a very mild sort of injury. However, sometimes you cannot control when you're in the heat of the moment, when you are angry, how much of that force are you inflicting on a child, especially when you use something like a belt or a shoe. Now with belts, this takes it to a much higher level of danger, because the buckle can come undone or can hit an eye. Children are maimed every day. The buckle especially is very dangerous when it comes to being used against the child for corporal punishment. The belt can hit an eye or another part of the face. Eyes, of course, are in danger. Many children are maimed every day because parents have used belts and children have lost their eyes and have left scars across their faces and different parts of their bodies. I don't think that there is any need to use corporal punishment against a child if a child has been taught from the beginning how to mind their parents. Those sorts of torture means are not really needed. So why would children continue to be hit when it has been such a long time since we have known that physical punishment is not recommended? So today we're going to be looking at what is your role as a parent? How do you see your position in the family as a parent, mother or father, grandparent? How are you to be significant in the life of this child? Is hitting them a way to making them good citizens? Is that how you were raised, and therefore this is how you're going to continue your legacy with your children and your children's children? Then I really would invite you to think about it. So here's where I take you a little bit into it. into history and see how that developed. Obviously, I have been doing parenting training for, about 40 years, and many parents have asked me the questions over and over again, and I have looked for the answers so that I would know exactly where things came from, and you would have the answer that I found. The whole idea of having a child hit in order to mind themselves and to learn came from the times of slavery. The lords, of course, would not hit their children. The nobility, kings and dukes and all of those would not hit their children. Their children were educated. They had private tutors. But the serfs, the common people, were seen as not having much intelligence, and they were considered property of the dukes and the nobility. And so as property, just like another animal, maybe an oxen or a horse, they would train with a belt or a stick. They would expect to be educated this way. So the hired hands would be hit if they didn't do things right, or the slaves obviously would be hit if they didn't do things right. Then they saw their wives and children as property to themselves. And of course, that's how you would deal with your wife and your child. They would be beasts that needed to be tamed in the same way as, a horse is supposed to be tamed. And that is where that idea comes from. That is a very poor model of a human being. So that idea of minding a child or having a child mind you through physical means came from that era. And unfortunately, even though we have made great strides in education, parents still use that model, reducing the child to this small beast who has to be tamed and modeled into a mindful, law-abiding citizen by means of, whatever is handy. So I don't think that is the way to go. And I'm sure most of you also don't think that's the way to go because you're watching this program. However, you may be in a family where your grandparents, maybe your in-laws, grandparents or aunts and uncles, we live in families. They believe this is the way it should be. So when your children go there and they are babysat by them, they may be subjected to this kind of treatment. I think it's very important that you as a parent realize your role with your child. And the law says that your primary responsibility is to provide the essential needs, which means food and shelter and some kind of nurturing environment where they can flourish, and to protect them from harm. So this is really what you are expected to do. Now, how you are supposed to enforce that expectation that society has of you is really important, and you have to think about it. So if you decide that you are in charge of this child and you are going to be the protector, the caretaker, the nurturer of this human being so that he or she can be all that he was meant to be, he or she was meant to be, then you need to talk to all the other members of the family who are going to be involved in this task and get a consensus as to how this child is going to be raised. And if you are in disagreement with someone else, and this someone else may be your own parents or your spouse's parents, then you may need to go for family counseling so that everyone expresses their concerns and the family therapist can let you decide how to get some more understanding as to how your child is going to be raised. So this would be a good time to talk about going to therapy, and maybe consulting a family therapist if you really need to have a consensus with all of your family members about how to raise your child. If you at this point that you're listening to this lecture, your child is not a baby anymore, so maybe you have used physical means with him or her, and you are at a point where you are thinking that you really need to change the way you deal with your child, it would be really important to go and consult a therapist. Most likely, if you're using the physical means with your child, it's because your parents used it with you. And if not, maybe someone else. If we live in a household with older members of our family, sometimes they will say, this is how you need to discipline your child. And it may be out of respect for them, or maybe not having any other ways to do it that you follow just because you want to have harmony in the household. However, what is at stake is really a lot, because once the child is continuously physically disciplined, it's going to be very difficult to change it to another way of doing it. The impact of physical discipline is a child getting resentful, angry, introverted, maybe not knowing how to be social, having a lot of insecurities, and they may express all of this in different ways. Some children go out there and become aggressive. Others become a little bit withdrawn and depressed. So it really would be to your advantage to consult a therapist to see how you can start making changes. If you haven't started, that would be, this is the best time for you to be learning how to be a good parent, because you don't have to start doing it. And it takes a lot of self-assurance to stand up to your parents or your in-laws and say, I'm sorry, I know this is how you discipline me and my brothers and sisters, or my husband and his brothers and sisters, but this is not how I want to raise my children. And the physical abuse stops here. And I'm calling it abuse because it's very difficult to stop with just one open-handed spanking over the buttocks. That may work very well for a 2-year-old, but a 7-year-old is not going to be as easy, and definitely not a 10 or a 15-year-old. So you would need to use other means if you're continuing to resort to the physical types of discipline over the other types. So if you're finding yourself in a war of power or wills, in some kind of a war with your child, chances are that it is a good time for you to visit a therapist and get some individual guidance on this. Ideally, yes, you will have a meeting of the minds with everyone who's going to be in contact with the child and say, this is how I would like for us to discipline little Joey or little Cynthia, that we're going to do this instead of physical discipline. And for everyone to have a consensus about how they're going to do it. So everyone is going to be learning the same techniques. That would be the absolute best. So, what techniques would we need to start using in order to change from the physical means to a more guided, psychologically based way of guiding a child? This is what this project is about. So the first thing would be that if you have started using physical means, that you promise yourself that you are not going to use it again, that you're going to use this other mean or the other techniques, because consistency will make or break this method. If you alternate between physical means and the other techniques, it's not going to work. The child will continue to challenge you because they already know that you may end up hitting them. The anxiety about when you're going to resort to that is greater than anything else, and they will continue to push you until you resort to the physical means, and then they can relax. They know it's over. This is how it works. So the first thing that we're going to say about techniques, other than what we have done in the previous episodes, is that if the child is doing something annoying, and it is annoying, but it's not hurting anyone, if you can put earplugs, if you can look the other direction, if you can do something to ignore it, that would be the best thing to do. Why is that? Anything you give attention to is going to be repeated. So if you tell the child, stop it, stop it, stop it, they will continue to do it. You are giving it that attention. So if you can not say anything, distract yourself, give yourself a timeout in a way, that means, trying to move yourself away from the child and what he or she is doing when he's doing something annoying, and not give him or her the attention that you normally give him, then that behavior eventually will disappear. But you have to be consistent. If you give it attention sometime by saying, okay, I told you already, stop it, then you already gave it the attention. It's not going to be extinguished. If as soon as the child does something, however minimal, positive, you rush in and you give him the attention, give him or her the attention, and say, oh, you just did this. I really appreciate that. And so you reward that. That behavior is going to be repeated versus the annoying one that you ignore. So that is the most basic principle of behavior modification, which is whatever you give attention is going to be rewarded, anything rewarded will be repeated, will continue to take place. Anything ignored eventually will be extinguished, will cease to be. Those two principles are key. And if you can practice that, even with your spouse or your sibling, if there is something they do that is annoying to you and they've been doing it for a long time, you can try and ignore it, not give it the answer you normally give. And so eventually they will stop doing that. But anything that they will do that you find pleasant or kind or thoughtful, if you make a point of rewarding that, then most likely you're going to have that repeated. So maybe somebody's smile will be rewarded versus somebody being grumpy. And so somebody eventually, if you give it the right response, they will end up smiling back to you and giving you much more of the more positive, kinder ways that you would like to get for yourself. So these are very basic behavioral principles that you can start practicing with yourself. Maybe you tend to be super critical of anything that you do or don't do, and you tend to concentrate on those and put yourself down for it instead of what is positive. So I'll give you something positive you can reward yourself for right now, which is you watched this program. You want to be a better parent, and I welcome your coming back to finding out more ways to be a much better parent. Thank you. So once again, I would like you to remember to subscribe to the Parenting Project if you're finding it useful, which I hope you are. And if you can let us know in any way what you have found useful and maybe anything that you would like addressed in these episodes, please do. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. Thank you.